My mother revealed another pregnancy. She's been expecting multiple times. But I refused to continue parenting her children, so I relocated, then she contacted authorities, and the situation escalated. Hey Reddit, my name is Ryan Cooper, and I'm 19 years old. This isn't just a story about having a lot of siblings. We're talking about a full-blown household that embodied every one of the 7 deadly sins. There was greed, wrath, and oh boy, so much more. It's a long and messy tale, and honestly, if I hadn't lived through it myself, I'd probably call it complete nonsense. But here's exactly how it all went down. Let me start from the very beginning. Picture this. My parents were basically kids themselves when they had me. My mom was 18 and my dad was 19. Real Einstein-level family planning right there. Since teenagers working minimum wage jobs can't exactly afford their own place, we crashed at my maternal grandparents' house. Those early years living with my grandparents were legitimately the best time of my entire childhood. And looking back, I can see why. My grandpa, let's call him Grandpa Joe, was this old-school mechanic who taught me everything from changing oil to rewiring electrical outlets. The man could fix absolutely anything with just duct tape and sheer determination. He had this workshop in the garage that was basically my childhood paradise, complete with organized tools, actual workbenches, and projects that actually made sense. My Grandma Rose was like Martha Stewart, but with genuine warmth instead of corporate polish. She made everything homemade, kept the house spotless, and never once made me feel like I was a burden on the family. Her kitchen always smelled like something amazing was happening, and there was always a fresh batch of brownies cooling on the counter. But here's what really made those years special. My grandparents treated me like I actually mattered. When I had a bad day at school, Grandma Rose would make hot cocoa and actually listen to what had happened. When I got excited about something I'd learned, Grandpa Joe would put down whatever he was doing and give me his full attention. They showed up to every single school event, remembered what I was interested in, and made me feel like being their grandson was something they were genuinely proud of. Meanwhile, my parents treated the place like it was a free hotel with room service included. They'd roll in at 3 a.m. from whatever party they'd been at, sleep until noon, and then complain about being stressed from all their adult responsibilities. My dad would sprawl on the couch playing video games while Grandpa Joe was trying to teach him practical skills like how to change a tire or fix a leaky faucet. That's what roadside assistance is for, my dad would say, never even looking up from his controller. What happens when you can't afford roadside assistance? Grandpa Joe would ask, genuinely trying to help. I'll figure it out when I get there, was always my dad's response. That was his approach to everything. Figure it out later, let someone else handle it, and avoid responsibility until it became absolutely unavoidable. My mom wasn't much better. She'd dump me on Grandma Rose whenever her friends wanted to hang out, never asking if it was convenient. Can you watch him for a few hours? Lisa's having a crisis and needs someone to talk to, she'd say. Translation: I want to gossip and drink wine, so here's my kid to deal with. When you're 5 years old, eating fresh brownies and learning cool stuff from Grandpa Joe, you don't really analyze your parents' character flaws. I just knew that life with my grandparents felt safe and predictable in a way that following my parents around never did. When I hit first grade, my parents announced they were ready for independence. They'd found this rundown rental house across town and were moving us out of my grandparents' place. The big reason for this sudden burst of maturity? My mom was pregnant again. I was actually excited about the whole thing. I was finally going to have a little brother or sister, and we'd have our own place. Man, if I could go back and slap some sense into my 6-year-old self, I absolutely would. The house was basically a downgrade in every possible way. No more of Grandpa Joe's workshop where I'd learn to use tools and fix things. No more of Grandma Rose's incredible cooking, just whatever frozen crap my parents could throw in the microwave. The place was this cramped 2-bedroom rental with thin walls, creaky floors, and a kitchen that could barely fit 2 people at the same time. My parents acted like they'd just upgraded to a mansion. Look, we have our own place, my mom would say proudly, gesturing around the cramped living room. The yard was mostly dirt with a few patches of dead grass scattered around, and the neighbors were the kind of people who had screaming matches at 4 a.m. on weeknights. It was a far cry from the peaceful, well-maintained home my grandparents had provided, but my parents were thrilled with their newfound independence. When my brother was born, I'm going to call him Screamer, because that kid had lungs like a fire truck siren. From day one, he could wake up the entire neighborhood with his crying. My parents started looking at me like I was their personal assistant, And the progression was gradual but absolutely relentless. It started with little requests that seemed innocent enough. Hey buddy, can you grab me a diaper while I finish this show? Or, keep your brother quiet. We're trying to have a conversation. I was 7 years old. 7. But apparently, that qualified me for childcare duties in their minds. Within a few months, these little helps became full-blown expectations. I was expected to entertain Screamer while my parents watched TV, to help with feeding time, and to change diapers when they were busy, doing absolutely nothing productive. The worst part was their attitude when I'd complain about it. If I said I wanted to play outside instead of holding the baby, my mom would hit me with, "This is what families do, and don't be selfish." Like wanting to actually be a kid was some kind of character flaw that needed to be corrected. My dad's contribution to this mess was even worse. He'd come home from his part-time job at some warehouse, collapse on the couch, and declare himself too exhausted to deal with any baby stuff. "I worked all day. I need to decompress," he'd say, reaching for the TV remote while Screamer was having a complete meltdown in the background. When they started going out on date nights and leaving me alone with Screamer, I knew I was completely screwed. Picture 8-year-old me microwaving Chef Boyardee for dinner and trying to get a toddler to bed while my parents were out reconnecting as a couple. They'd leave me with a list of instructions like I was some hired babysitter, except I wasn't getting paid and I couldn't quit. The instructions were always the same. Bedtime is 9 p.m. There's formula in the fridge. Call only if it's an emergency. Emergency? I was 8 years old. Everything felt like an emergency when you're alone with a screaming baby and have no idea what you're doing. But if anything went wrong, somehow it was always my fault for not being responsible enough. If Screamer wouldn't stop crying, I should have tried harder to calm him down. If he spit up on his clean clothes, I should have been more careful during feeding time. If the house was messy when they got back, I should have cleaned up while simultaneously watching a toddler. Yeah, it was that bad. But wait, it got so much worse when they decided to make even more minions. Over the next 11 years, my parents decided to populate their own personal daycare center. 5 more kids joined our household, and each one added exponentially to the insanity. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters that transformed my teenage years into what I can only describe as a survival horror game. First up, we have Screamer, the first edition, who still lived up to his name at 10 years old. This kid could hit decibel levels that probably violated noise ordinances in our neighborhood. He'd discovered that screaming got him attention fast, so that became his default communication method for literally everything. Didn't want to wear shoes? Scream. Didn't like what was for dinner? Scream. Couldn't find his favorite toy? Nuclear-level screaming that could probably be heard from space. Then there's the Destroyer, kid number 3, who earned his nickname by breaking everything he touched. My gaming headset that I'd bought with my own money from my part-time job? That became his masterpiece. This kid had hands like a demolition crew and the impulse control of a sugar-high toddler. I once watched him break what was supposed to be an indestructible toy truck within 5 minutes of opening the package. 5 minutes. The manufacturer clearly hadn't tested their product against Hurricane Destroyer. Next, we have Spitter, kid number 4 and our little princess. Think of the game Plants vs. Zombies. She was definitely the plant in this scenario. Her favorite hobby was spitting on everything, and I mean everything. Meals became like Russian roulette because you never knew which plate had been contaminated. She'd take a bite of her sandwich, spit it back out onto the bread, and then offer it to someone else like she was being generous. My parents thought this was just a phase that she'd grow out of. Spoiler alert, she never did. Tornado, kid number 5, could turn a clean room into a complete disaster zone in under 5 minutes. I swear this kid defied the laws of physics with how fast he could create chaos. You could literally watch him enter a room and count down from 10 before everything was completely destroyed. It was like watching a natural disaster in fast-forward motion. Then there's Velcro, kid number 6, the clingy one who couldn't function unless he was physically attached to someone. Guess who that someone usually was? Spoiler alert, it wasn't our parents. This kid would follow me around the house like a lost puppy, crying if I went to the bathroom alone and having complete meltdowns if I tried to go anywhere without him. Privacy became a foreign concept in my life. And finally, Hurricane, the baby fresh out of the oven and already living up to the family tradition of making everyone else's life exponentially harder. 6 disasters, each new addition meaning more responsibilities dumped directly on me. My parents' logic was always the same. You're so good with kids. Translation: we're too lazy to actually parent, so that's your job now. Here's a perfect example of the absolute dysfunction that defined our family life. Picture family dinner with frozen pizza, because apparently cooking actual food is rocket science. The scene would play out the same way every single time. My parents would heat up however many pizzas they thought we needed, dump them on plates, and call it dinner. If Spitter didn't like the pepperoni, it went straight onto the floor, not picked off onto her plate, not offered to someone else, but directly on the floor where people walked. When I pointed out that this was completely disgusting and unsanitary, my dad would say, "Kids will be kids. At least she's eating the rest." No consequences, no teaching moments, just complete acceptance that we were apparently living in a barn instead of a house. And of course, they expected me to clean it up. "Can you grab that pepperoni before someone steps on it?" became a regular request. Public outings were my personal version of hell on earth. Picture me chasing Tornado through Walmart while Screamer was having a complete meltdown because we wouldn't buy him a toy. Meanwhile, Destroyer was knocking over a carefully stacked display of soup cans, Spitter was literally licking the shopping cart handle, and Velcro was clinging to my leg, making it impossible for me to walk properly. And where were my parents during all this chaos? They'd be standing there like tourists watching street performers, occasionally yelling, "Stop that!" without actually doing anything to stop anything. Other shoppers would stare at us like we were some kind of wildlife documentary. And I just wanted to disappear into the floor, or wear a shirt that said, "Not my kids, not my choice," to avoid the judgmental looks I was getting. "Maybe you should control your kids," one lady suggested to my mom during a particularly spectacular meltdown in the cereal aisle. My mom's response? "They're just being kids. Some people are so judgmental." Lady, your offspring just destroyed an entire end cap display and are now using Cheerios boxes as soccer balls. That's not being kids. That's being feral animals who happen to walk upright. The car rides to and from these public disasters were almost worse than the actual scenes themselves. Picture 7 people crammed into a minivan that smelled like old milk and dirty diapers, with me trying to keep everyone from literally killing each other, while my parents argued about directions, money, or whose turn it was to deal with the next inevitable crisis. "Are we there yet?" became the soundtrack of my adolescence, along with "He's touching me" and "I have to pee," and the wonderful chorus of baby crying that never seemed to stop, no matter what we did. As I got older, my parents' expectations evolved from "help out occasionally" to "you are now our unpaid employee." Every weekend, every school break, every single moment I wasn't physically sitting in a classroom was automatically claimed for babysitting duty. They never asked if I had plans or if I wanted to do something else. They just announced their decisions like royal decrees. "We're going to dinner Saturday. You'll watch the kids." It didn't matter if I'd made plans with friends or had school events I wanted to attend. My life belonged to them and their reproductive choices. Friday nights became a particular source of frustration and resentment. While other kids my age were hanging out at the mall, going to movies, or just being normal teenagers, I was stuck at home changing diapers and trying to get 5 kids to bed at reasonable hours. My social life didn't just suffer. It was completely non-existent. I watched my friends post about their weekend adventures on social media, while I was dealing with temper tantrums and bedtime routines that never seemed to end. The breaking point came when I was 15 years old. My friend Tyler was having this party, nothing crazy, just kids from school hanging out, playing games, normal teenage stuff. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks because I never got to do normal teenager things. For once in my life, I wanted to hang out with people my own age without having to worry about diaper changes or meltdowns. My parents actually said I could go, and I was genuinely shocked. For once, they seemed to understand that I needed some kind of social life outside of their chaos. I spent the entire week excited about finally getting to hang out with people my age without having to worry about my siblings' constant needs. I had picked out what I was going to wear, made plans with friends about what we'd do, and felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to get to be a normal kid for one night. Then, exactly 2 hours before the party, they dropped the bomb on me. "Change of plans," my mom said casually, like she was mentioning the weather. "We decided to catch the late movie. You need to watch everyone." The casual way they said it made my blood absolutely boil, like my plans were just some minor inconvenience that could be dismissed without a second thought. "But you said I could go to Tyler's," I protested, feeling my heart sink into my stomach. "Plans change," my dad said with a shrug. "Family comes first." I completely lost it. I never get to do anything. I'm 15, not their dad. The frustration that had been building for years just exploded out of me. My dad's face went dark with anger, and I knew I was in trouble. "We provide you with food and shelter," he said in that cold voice that meant the conversation was over. "The least you can do is help out when we need it. Stop being ungrateful." Ungrateful? I was ungrateful for wanting one night, just one night, to be a normal teenager instead of an unpaid babysitter. That's when my cousin Derek came into the picture and changed everything. Derek was my mom's nephew, about 25 years old, and the complete opposite of our family's dysfunction. He'd been watching this whole situation unfold over the years during family gatherings, and that night he happened to show up just as my parents were getting ready to leave for their movie. "Where's he going all dressed up?" Derek asked, noticing me in my good clothes that I'd picked out for the party. "Oh, he was supposed to go to some party, but we need him here," my mom said casually, like canceling my plans was as normal as changing the TV channel. Derek looked between me and the little demons, who were already starting their evening routine of destruction. "When's the last time this kid got to hang out with friends?" he asked pointedly. "He hangs out with his siblings all the time," my mom replied, completely missing the point. "That's not the same thing," Derek said firmly. He turned to me with a look I'd never seen from any adult in my family before, like he actually cared about what I wanted. "Go to your party. I'll watch them." My mom started protesting, but Derek shut it down with the kind of calm authority I wished I had. "He's 15. He should be hanging out with kids his age, not raising yours." Boom. First person in my family to actually acknowledge what was happening to me. My parents tried to argue with Derek, but he wasn't budging an inch. "I'm not a teenager you can guilt trip," he said calmly but firmly. "Either I watch them, or you stay home. Your choice." The look on my parents' faces was priceless. They clearly weren't used to an adult calling them out on their behavior. That night at Tyler's party was the first time in years that I actually felt like a normal kid. We played video games, ate pizza that nobody had spit on, and I didn't have to worry about anyone's bedtime but my own. For a few precious hours, I got to just be 15 years old instead of a substitute parent. I laughed harder that night than I had in months, and I realized just how much I'd been missing out on. From that point on, Derek became like the big brother I never had. He'd check in on me regularly, take me out to get away from the house when things got too intense, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid to call my parents out on their crap when he witnessed it firsthand. Derek became my lifeline in a house that was slowly drowning me. "You know this isn't normal, right?" he asked me during one of our escape missions to get ice cream. We were sitting in his car outside the Dairy Queen, and I was finally relaxing for the first time in weeks. "It's just how our family works," I said, repeating the line my parents had drilled into me over the years. "No, it's how your parents avoid their responsibilities," Derek replied, looking me straight in the eye. "There's a difference, kid." Having someone finally validate what I'd been feeling for years was like getting permission to be angry about my situation. Derek helped me understand that what was happening to me wasn't normal family dynamics. It was parentification, and it was wrong. For the first time, I had an adult in my corner who saw what was really going on. Junior year brought what I can only describe as the ultimate slap in the face. When Hurricane was born, my parents made a decision that still makes my blood pressure spike just thinking about it. Instead of putting the crib in their room like normal human beings, they decided to stick it in mine. Their justification? "You're so good with babies, and we really need our sleep for work." Let me get this straight. They made this baby, but I was the one who needed to sacrifice sleep to take care of her because they had jobs? Like I didn't have school, homework, and a future to worry about. So at 16 years old, I became a single dad to my infant sister. The setup in my room was basically a nursery that happened to have my bed shoved in a corner. There was a crib against one wall, a changing table where my desk used to be, and bottles and baby supplies covering every available surface. My computer got moved to a cramped corner where I could barely use it, and forget about having any privacy whatsoever. My parents' bedroom was right down the hall, but they acted like it was in another time zone. "We didn't hear her crying," they'd say the next morning, while I stumbled around like an extra from The Walking Dead, trying to get ready for school. The whole neighborhood could hear Hurricane crying at 2 a.m. They just chose to ignore it because they knew I'd handle it. 2 a.m. feedings, diaper changes, dealing with colic, walking the floor for hours trying to get her back to sleep, all while trying to maintain decent grades and not look like a zombie at school. The sleep deprivation was absolutely brutal. I'd find myself nodding off in class, struggling to concentrate on homework, and feeling like I was constantly running on empty. My grades started tanking, and how could they not? I went from being a solid B-plus student to barely maintaining a C average. My friends stopped inviting me places because I was always exhausted or unavailable. My social life didn't just die. It was murdered with malice aforethought. Teachers started asking if everything was okay at home, but what was I supposed to say? My parents turned me into a single teenage dad? That seemed too crazy to be believable. When my guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, called home about my dropping GPA, the conversation was absolutely unbelievable. "We're concerned about his academic performance," she told my mom. "His grades have dropped significantly this semester. Is everything okay at home?" My mom, without missing a beat, replied, "Oh, he's just going through a rebellious phase. You know how teenagers can be. Not applying himself like he should." Mrs. Henderson, clearly confused by this response, pressed further. "His teachers say he falls asleep in class frequently. Are you sure there isn't something affecting his sleep schedule?" "He stays up too late playing video games, probably," my mom said dismissively. "Kids these days don't know how to manage their time." Video games? Right, because I had so much free time for gaming between night feedings and diaper changes. Mrs. Henderson suggested that maybe I needed more support or fewer responsibilities at home to help me focus on my studies. My mom actually laughed at this suggestion. "Kids these days have it too easy," she said. A little responsibility never hurt anyone. Builds character. The conversation ended with my mom promising to talk to me about time management and study habits, which translated to a lecture about how I needed to try harder and stop making excuses for my poor performance. The final academic kick in the teeth came that spring. I'd been accepted to this competitive engineering summer program at the local university, 3 weeks of intensive coursework that could have seriously boosted my college applications. The program was highly selective, looked incredible on resumes, and for the first time in months, I was genuinely excited about something related to my future. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that could help me get into a good college and eventually escape the chaos that had become my life. My parents' response when I told them about the acceptance? "Who's going to watch the kids while we work?" "It's only 3 weeks," I argued, desperately trying to make them understand how important this was. "And Derek said he'd help out on weekends." "We're not imposing on Derek every time you want to do something," my mom said dismissively, like this was just another frivolous teenage request instead of a legitimate educational opportunity. They flat out refused to let me go. No discussion, no compromise, no consideration for what this opportunity could mean for my college prospects and future. I watched that acceptance letter turn into just another reminder of what I was missing out on because my parents couldn't be bothered to raise their own kids. "There will be other opportunities," my dad said, like prestigious summer programs grew on trees. "When?" I asked, feeling desperate. "When will there be time for other opportunities?" He didn't have an answer for that question because we both knew the truth. There would never be time for my opportunities as long as I was trapped in this situation. The worst part was watching other kids from my school post about their summer programs on social media. Kids who weren't any smarter than me, didn't have better grades, but had parents who prioritized their education over their own convenience. They got to spend their summer learning cutting-edge engineering concepts and building impressive resumes, while I spent mine changing diapers and breaking up fights between Spitter and Tornado. Around this time, my mom's sister decided to weigh in on the situation. Aunt Linda, and yes, that's actually her name, was basically my mom's enabler and #1 cheerleader. Linda had 2 kids of her own, but they were these perfectly behaved little angels who never caused problems. Of course, she also had a husband who actually helped with parenting and enough money to hire babysitters when they needed a break. She'd come over for Sunday dinners and watch the chaos unfold like it was some kind of entertainment. While Tornado was systematically destroying the living room and Spitter was contaminating the food supply, Linda would sit there with this annoying smile on her face. "You're so lucky to have such a helpful oldest," she'd tell my mom, while I was literally chasing Velcro around the table, trying to get him to eat something that wasn't pure sugar. "My kids would never be this responsible," she'd add, like being forced into premature adulthood was some kind of blessing. When Derek started calling out my parents' behavior during family gatherings, Linda appointed herself as the family defender. "Some people need to mind their own business," she said pointedly during one particularly tense dinner. Derek had questioned why I was the one getting all the kids ready for bed while my parents watched TV. "Not everyone understands family values," she continued with a pointed look at Derek. Derek didn't back down. "What family values? Making a teenager raise your kids? He's learning responsibility, Linda shot back. It'll make him a better man. It'll make him resent his family, Derek replied, and the tension in that room could have been cut with a knife. My parents sat there like this was just normal family discussion, while I wanted to disappear into the floor. Linda cornered me later in the kitchen while I was cleaning up the dinner disaster zone, blocking my path to the dishwasher. You know how good you have it here, right? She said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Some kids don't have families that care about them, she continued, like emotional manipulation was just another Sunday dinner tradition. I was 17 and absolutely tired of the gaslighting. Yeah, some kids also don't have to be parents to their siblings. Her face went ice cold. Gratitude goes a long way in this family. Your parents work hard to provide for all of you. And I work hard to raise their kids, I shot back. What's your point? Your parents could have put you in foster care when things got difficult, she said, playing her trump card. Instead, they kept the family together. Like basic parental responsibility was some kind of favor they were doing me. That's when I realized Linda wasn't just enabling my parents. She genuinely thought this was normal. She saw nothing wrong with a 17-year-old being responsible for 6 younger siblings while the actual parents watched TV and went on date nights. The family dynamics got even more twisted when Linda started bringing her perfect little angels over for playdates. Her kids would sit quietly with coloring books while mine were turning the house into a disaster zone, and she'd make these pointed comments about different parenting styles. Some families are more structured, she'd say, watching Destroyer attempt to flush a toy car down the toilet. But every family finds what works for them. What worked for my family, apparently, was complete chaos with me as the designated damage control specialist. Linda's visits became a source of dread for me because she'd always find ways to reinforce my parents' narrative that I was lucky to be so trusted with important responsibilities. She'd praise my reliability in front of my parents, which just encouraged them to pile on more duties. "You've raised such a responsible young man," she'd tell my mom, like they'd actually raised me instead of just dumping responsibilities on me until I had no choice but to handle them. Fast forward to last month. I'm 19 now, barely surviving senior year with a 2.8 GPA that should have been much higher if I'd been allowed to actually focus on my education instead of being a full-time caregiver. That's when my parents decided to drop their atomic bomb during what they called a family meeting. "We have exciting news," my mom announced, like she was about to reveal winning lottery numbers. I just knew what was coming next, and I could feel my stomach dropping into my shoes. "We're having another baby," she exclaimed with genuine excitement. "Number 7! Lucky number 7! The room started spinning like I was trapped in some twisted version of Inception. They weren't even telling me this as their son. The way my dad phrased the follow-up made everything crystal clear about their real intentions. "We're going to need extra help when the baby comes," he said, looking directly at me. "Good thing you're 19 now, so you can take on more responsibility without any legal issues." Legal issues. They'd actually thought about the legal implications of their child labor operation. That statement hit me like a slap in the face because it revealed just how calculated this whole thing had been. Screamer actually started cheering. "Another baby! Can we name it?" he asked, bouncing in his seat like this was the best news ever. Destroyer looked genuinely confused. "Where are we going to put it? There's already no room," he said, which was probably the most logical thing anyone had said in that room. Spitter, with her usual charm, asked, "Can I feed it? I promise I won't spit on it," which was somehow both disgusting and touching at the same time. Velcro immediately attached himself to my leg like a human barnacle. "Will you take care of this one too?" he asked, looking up at me with those big eyes that made me want to cry. And Hurricane, as if she understood the conversation perfectly, started crying right on cue, adding her own soundtrack to this disaster announcement. I looked at my parents and saw 2 people who had learned absolutely nothing from the first 6 disasters they'd created. My mom was practically glowing with excitement, like this was the best news she'd ever shared. My dad had this satisfied smirk on his face, like he'd just solved all their problems by deciding to make another minion for me to raise. That's when something inside me just snapped. I was done, completely, utterly, 100% done with this insanity. I excused myself from the family meeting, went to my room, which was still half nursery, half teenage bedroom, and called Grandpa Joe. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. "Grandpa, they made another mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need help. Can I please come live with you?" The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds before he absolutely exploded. Not at me, but at the situation. "Those idiots are having another kid? Jesus Christ, what's wrong with them? I'd never heard Grandpa Joe swear before, and that's when I knew he was just as fed up with my parents as I was. "Pack your essentials," he said firmly. "We're coming to get you right now." While I was frantically packing, my parents were already banging on my bedroom door, demanding that I come out and discuss this like adults. I ignored them completely. I grabbed some clothes, my phone and charger, and most importantly, my birth certificate and social security card. Shout out to various online forums for that crucial tip about important documents. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Rose showed up within 30 minutes, and I was out of there faster than you could say child labor laws. I'd never seen my grandparents look so angry. Grandpa Joe looked like he wanted to shake my parents until their teeth rattled, and Grandma Rose had this cold fury in her eyes that I'd never seen before. The look on my parents' faces when they realized I was actually leaving was pure shock. Not sadness that their son was moving out. Not regret about how they treated me. They were already panicking about who was going to handle all their responsibilities. "You can't just leave!" my mom shouted, like I was breaking some kind of binding contract. "Watch me," I said, walking past her with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "We're your parents," my dad added, like that title meant something coming from people who had treated me like hired help for years. "No," I said, stopping at the door and turning back to look at them. "You're the people who gave birth to me. There's a difference." Grandpa Joe stepped up beside me, and I could feel his protective presence like a shield. "If you'd treated him like family instead of free labor, maybe he wouldn't be leaving," he said, in a voice that could have cut glass. My dad puffed up like he was going to argue, but Grandma Rose shut him down with one look that could have frozen hell over. "We'll be in touch about his things," she said curtly, then guided me out the door. As we drove away, I could see my parents standing in the doorway with the kids' chaos erupting behind them, finally getting a taste of what their lives looked like without their unpaid babysitter to handle everything. Within hours of my great escape, my phone turned into a complete notification nightmare. Angry texts, missed calls, and voicemails that ranged from furious to manipulative to downright pathetic started flooding in like a digital tsunami. It was like watching my parents cycle through all 5 stages of grief in real time, except they never quite made it to acceptance. First came the pure, unadulterated anger. "How dare you abandon your family like this? Get your ass home right now. You're being selfish and ungrateful." The messages came in rapid-fire succession, each one more demanding than the last. When that approach didn't work, they switched tactics to guilt tripping. "Your siblings are asking where you are," one text read. "Velcro hasn't stopped crying since you left." Another message tried to pull at my heartstrings. "Hurricane keeps looking around for you. She doesn't understand why you're not here." Then came the manipulation phase, where they tried to rewrite history completely. "We've always been there for you. Family sticks together through thick and thin. This isn't how we raised you." It was fascinating watching them try to gaslight me via text message, like I hadn't lived through years of their neglect and exploitation. But the text that really showed their true colors came from my dad at 3 a.m. "Do you have any idea how much babysitters cost? You can't just leave us hanging like this." There it was, their real concern laid bare. They weren't upset about losing their son. They were upset about losing their free childcare. The mask was completely off, and their priorities were crystal clear. Not "we miss you" or "we're sorry," but a complaint about babysitting costs. It was both infuriating and validating at the same time. My mom followed up with increasingly desperate messages about how they needed me and couldn't function without my help. Again, not because they missed me as their child, but because I was essential to their household operations. "You don't understand how hard this is for us," she texted. "We can't handle all of this alone." When guilt and manipulation didn't work, they escalated to threats. "You're not 18 until graduation. We can force you to come back. We're calling the police. You're making a huge mistake that will ruin your future." The threats kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. They actually followed through on the police threat not once, but twice. Both times, the responding officers took one look at the situation and basically told my parents to get a life. The first cop was clearly annoyed after talking to me privately and confirming that I was at my grandparents' house willingly. He explained to my parents in no uncertain terms that I was old enough to choose where I lived. "But he's still our minor child," my mom insisted, clinging to this technicality like it was a life raft. "Ma'am, he's 19 and a high school senior," Officer Martinez replied with barely concealed patience. "Unless you have evidence of kidnapping or coercion, there's nothing we can do." "This is kidnapping," my mom shrieked. "They're turning him against us!" Officer Martinez looked tired of dealing with their nonsense. "Did your son go willingly?" "Well, yes, but..." "Then it's not kidnapping. It's an adult making a decision about where to live." The second call 2 days later brought another officer who was significantly less patient with their bullshit. "We've been through this already," he told my parents bluntly. "Your son is old enough to decide where he wants to live. Maybe focus on the kids you still have at home instead of the one who's clearly capable of taking care of himself." My dad's face turned redder than a stop sign. "This is harassment! They're interfering with our parental rights!" "Your parental rights over a 19-year-old are pretty limited, sir," the officer replied dryly. "I suggest you contact a lawyer if you think otherwise." After the police calls failed, the threats started coming in earnest. They were going to sue my grandparents for interfering with parental rights and kidnapping me. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent. They were going to do whatever it took to force me back home. Grandpa Joe, being the absolute legend he is, called their bluff immediately. "Go ahead and get a lawyer," he told them during one particularly heated phone call. "I'd love to hear you explain to a judge why you're suing to force your son into unpaid childcare." "It's not unpaid childcare, it's family responsibility," my dad protested. "Right, and I'm sure a judge will be very interested in hearing about those family responsibilities," Grandpa Joe replied smoothly. That shut them up real quick. Meanwhile, Derek was getting updates from the family drama through Linda, who was apparently leading some kind of campaign to paint me as the villain in this whole situation. The family group text, which Derek shared with me, was an absolute masterpiece of delusion and denial. "I can't believe he would abandon his family like this," Linda wrote. "After everything they've done for him, his poor mother is beside herself, 7 kids, and no help." Derek wasn't having any of it. "Maybe if they'd treated him like a son instead of free labor, he wouldn't have left. He's being selfish and ungrateful," Linda shot back. "Family sticks together through thick and thin." "Family doesn't exploit their kids," Derek replied. "You're filling his head with nonsense about being exploited," Linda continued. "He had a roof over his head and food on the table. And what did he have to do to earn those basic necessities that every parent is legally required to provide?" Derek asked. Linda didn't have an answer for that one, which was telling in itself. The best part was watching the family dynamic shift in real time as other relatives who'd been silent started asking uncomfortable questions about the situation. My mom's cousin posted in the group chat, "Wait, why was he doing so much childcare? Aren't there 6 other kids and 2 parents?" Suddenly, Linda was backpedaling faster than a politician during election season. "He wasn't doing that much. He just helped out like any good big brother would," she replied, trying to minimize the situation. Derek, bless him, wasn't letting that slide for a second. He had a baby sleeping in his room and was doing night feeds. That's not helping out. That's being a parent. The truth was finally coming out, and Linda clearly didn't like how it made her sister look. Here's where things got really interesting. It turns out Grandpa Joe and Grandma Rose had been documenting way more than I realized. Every concerning conversation, every time I'd shown up exhausted at family gatherings, every joke I'd made about being the third parent. They'd been keeping track of it all. Grandpa Joe pulled out this notebook he'd been maintaining for months, and I was blown away by how thorough he'd been. The notebook was absolutely damning. It had entries like, March 15th, he fell asleep during dinner, says he was up all night with the baby again, and April 2nd, missed his school's science fair because parents needed him to babysit. He'd been working on his project for months. There was even an entry from June. Noticed he's lost weight. Asked when he last had a proper meal that wasn't interrupted by childcare duties. My grandparents had been preparing for this moment without even telling me. They'd been building a case, documenting everything, because they could see where this was all heading. When they finally called Child Protective Services, they had documentation going back months, screenshots of texts where my parents demanded I cancel plans for babysitting duty, and pictures I'd sent of the house disaster zones as jokes that actually showed the chaos and neglect. The social worker assigned to our case was Mrs. Wilson, and when she showed up at my parents' house for the initial visit, she found exactly what you'd expect, complete and utter chaos. My parents tried to play it off as just one of those days and kids being kids, but she wasn't buying it for a second. "Where did the children usually play?" she asked, looking around the disaster zone that used to be a living room. "Oh, anywhere really," my mom replied with a nervous laugh. "We believe in letting kids be creative and express themselves." "I see," Mrs. Wilson said, making notes in her file. And who typically supervises their creativity? My parents exchanged glances like they were trying to telepathically coordinate their story. Well, usually our oldest helps out, but he's not available right now. Not available how? Mrs. Wilson pressed. He's staying with his grandparents temporarily, my dad said. Teenage rebellion phase. You know how it is. Mrs. Wilson made another note. I'd like to speak with the children individually, if that's okay. When she interviewed my siblings separately, the truth came out faster than water through a broken dam. Kids are terrible liars, especially when they're just telling the truth about their daily lives. The questions were simple, and the answers were devastating. Who usually dealt with the baby at night? She asked. Ryan, came the unanimous response. Who helped with homework? Ryan. Who got you ready for school when mom and dad were too tired? Take a wild guess. Who made sure you brushed your teeth, had clean clothes, and ate something resembling breakfast? 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Screamer, bless his chaotic little heart, was particularly honest during his interview. He does everything, he told Mrs. Wilson matter-of-factly. Mom and dad watch TV mostly. My older brother helped me with everything, like everything. The house inspection was even worse for my parents. How long has your oldest child been primarily responsible for childcare duties? She asked during the formal interview. He's not primarily responsible, my mom protested. He just helps out when we need it. According to the other children, he was the one handling night feedings, bedtime routines, and daily care for the infant. Mrs. Wilson replied, consulting her notes. Would you consider that helping out? My parents fumbled for explanations, but they couldn't come up with any good justifications for why a teenager should be doing the work of parents. The final nail in the coffin was when Mrs. Wilson asked to see where Hurricane slept. My parents had to admit that the crib had been in my room, not theirs. So where is the baby sleeping now? She asked. Oh, we moved the crib to the living room temporarily while we figure out a more permanent solution, my mom said, clearly scrambling. Temporarily, Mrs. Wilson repeated, making another note. Right. She wrapped up her initial visit with a promise to return for follow-up inspections and individual interviews with each family member. The look on my parents' faces suggested they knew they were absolutely screwed. The CPS investigation wrapped up after 3 weeks of unannounced visits, interviews, and documentation review. The official finding was everything I'd hoped for and more. Inappropriate delegation of parental responsibilities to a minor child, resulting in educational impact and emotional stress. In non-bureaucratic terms, my parents were officially guilty of exactly what everyone with functioning brain cells already knew. They'd been using me as free childcare for years. The consequences were absolutely beautiful to witness. First up, mandatory parenting classes, not suggested, but required. My parents, both in their 30s, had to sit in a classroom with other dysfunctional adults and learn what responsibilities you can actually give to children of different ages. The irony was delicious. They had to take notes on things like age-appropriate chores and recognizing signs of stress in children. You know, basic parenting concepts they should have figured out before having 7 kids. Next came the required childcare education. They had to complete an entire course on age-appropriate household tasks and recognizing signs of stress in children. Imagine having to learn from strangers what you should have known instinctively as parents. The course covered topics like the difference between helping and parenting and how excessive responsibility affects child development. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall during those sessions. Then there were the supervised visits, 6 months of them. Mrs. Wilson would be making surprise visits to ensure they weren't pulling the same crap with my remaining siblings. The house had to maintain certain cleanliness standards. The kids had to be properly supervised, and my parents had to demonstrate actual parenting instead of their usual chaos management approach. But my personal favorite consequence was the professional childcare requirement. They were now required to use actual paid babysitters for date nights and errands. No more free labor from their kids. No more dumping responsibilities on whoever was convenient. If they wanted to go out, they had to pay someone like normal parents do. The final requirement was a written acknowledgement of my rights. They had to sign a document stating that I had the right to pursue education and activities without being burdened by excessive household responsibilities. Seeing them put their signatures on that paper was probably one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The real consequences hit them where it hurt most, their wallets and their reputation. Word spread through their social circle about the CPS investigation faster than gossip at a high school reunion. Suddenly, other parents were asking uncomfortable questions about their family dynamics. Some of their friends started viewing them differently when they learned why their oldest son had moved out. The financial impact was immediate and brutal. Professional childcare for 5 kids during their weekly date night? That's easily $120 to $180 per night. Now they had to pay someone else to do what they'd been forcing me to do for free, or drag all the kids along, which meant dealing with the chaos themselves. The reality of actual parenting costs hit them like a freight train. My dad had to pick up extra shifts at work just to cover the babysitting costs. My mom couldn't maintain her part-time schedule anymore because someone actually had to be home with the kids during non-school hours. For the first time in years, they were experiencing the full weight of their reproductive choices. During one particularly tense family gathering, Linda tried to defend them yet again. "CPS just doesn't understand how close families operate," she said, clearly grasping at straws. "They're interfering with family dynamics that have worked for years." Derek, who was completely fed up with her enabling at this point, finally let her have it. "Close families don't treat their teenagers like unpaid employees. Maybe if you'd spoken up instead of encouraging this mess, things wouldn't have gotten this far." "I was supporting my sister," Linda protested. "You were enabling child exploitation," Derek shot back. "There's a difference." The room went dead silent. Even my parents couldn't argue with that assessment because it was exactly what had been happening all along. My mom's pregnancy became a source of stress instead of excitement. The whole family was now under scrutiny, and they couldn't just dump another baby on me to handle. The reality of actually having to parent 7 children themselves was starting to sink in. The custody threats evaporated completely when their lawyer, they eventually did get one, explained that any judge would laugh them out of court for trying to force a 19-year-old into unpaid childcare. The lawyer actually recommended they focus on repairing our relationship instead of trying to compel my return. Fat chance of that happening. As for me, I'm absolutely thriving. My grades bounced back immediately once I started getting full nights of sleep. I went from that dismal 2.8 GPA to pulling a solid 3.6 by the end of senior year. I even got accepted to that engineering program I'd missed the previous summer. They had a spot open for a spring session, and my improved grades made me a competitive candidate again. My college applications are looking solid for the first time in years, and I've even got a part-time job at Grandpa Joe's buddy's auto shop. Real work that pays actual money. What a revolutionary concept. I'm learning valuable skills, earning my own income, and being treated like the young adult I actually am instead of a live-in nanny. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Rose refused to accept any money from my parents for my expenses. "We're investing in our grandson's future," Grandma Rose told my mom during one heated phone call. "Something you should have been doing all along instead of using him as your personal childcare service." The relationship with my parents is permanently damaged, but honestly, I'm completely okay with that. Some bridges are meant to be burned, especially when they lead back to a place of exploitation and neglect. Some of my siblings have started asking questions about why I left and why strangers keep visiting their house to check on things. Screamer, with his usual directness, asked my mom why I had to take care of Hurricane at night when that was parent stuff. My mom's response was predictably vague. "It's okay, families have to help each other." But Screamer, not satisfied with vague answers, shot back with, "But why didn't you help him with his homework like he helped us?" Out of the mouths of babes, right? Even a 10-year-old could see the unfairness in the situation. Derek has become an even bigger part of my life, truly taking on that big brother role I never knew I needed. He's been there for every milestone, every college application deadline, and every moment when I needed someone to remind me that I made the right choice. Having someone in my corner who genuinely cares about my future instead of what I can do for them has been life-changing. But here's the absolute best part. My parents are finally learning what it actually takes to raise 6 kids without their unpaid live-in nanny. Derek's response to their financial complaints was absolutely perfect. "Welcome to what actual parenting costs. Most people figure that out before having 6 kids. My parents went from having a live-in nanny who worked for free to actually having to parent their own children. The house is still complete chaos, but now it's their chaos to manage entirely by themselves. They can't dump it on me anymore, and watching them struggle with the reality of their choices has been incredibly satisfying. Every sleepless night with the baby is now theirs to handle. Every tantrum, every meltdown, every destroyed room, it's all on them now. Every meal they have to supervise without spitting incidents, every public outing where they actually have to watch their kids instead of delegating to me, every moment of the day-to-day chaos. They're experiencing it all firsthand for the first time in years. The irony is absolutely beautiful. They spent years telling me I was selfish for wanting a normal teenage life, but the moment their free labor walked out the door, they realized exactly how much work they'd been dumping on me. The angry texts stopped after about a month, replaced by occasional attempts at reconciliation that were transparent and pathetic. But it's too little, too late. You can't exploit someone for years and then expect them to come back when you finally realize you need them. You can't treat your child like an employee and then act surprised when they quit. The damage is done, and there's no going back. I'm done being their solution to problems they created. I'm done sacrificing my future for their convenience. I'm done pretending that parentifying your oldest child is normal family dynamics. I've got my own life to build now, and for the first time in years, I actually get to live it on my own terms. The best part of all this? My parents are discovering that raising 6 kids is actually impossible without help. They're realizing that what they put me through was never reasonable or fair. They're learning that the family responsibilities they talked about were actually just them avoiding their own responsibilities as parents. Every day they have to deal with the full reality of their choices. They're getting a taste of what my life was like for years. The difference is, they're adults who chose to have these kids, and I was a child who got drafted into service without any say in the matter. I've heard through the family grapevine that they're constantly exhausted, constantly stressed, and constantly overwhelmed. Welcome to parenthood, the actual version, not the one where you dump everything on your oldest child. They're finally experiencing what it's like to be responsible for the lives they created. Meanwhile, I'm living my best life. I wake up when I want to, or when my alarm goes off for school or work like a normal person. I eat meals that haven't been contaminated by spitter. I can have friends over without worrying about Destroyer breaking their stuff. I can focus on my homework without being interrupted by diaper changes or meltdowns. I can make plans and actually follow through with them. I can pursue my interests and hobbies. I can think about my future without having to factor in 6 other people's needs. I can be a teenager, and soon I'll be able to be a young adult without carrying the weight of an entire household on my shoulders. The relationship with my parents will probably never recover, and I'm genuinely okay with that. Some people might think that's sad, but I think it's healthy. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about how people treat you. My grandparents and Derek have shown me more love and support in the past few months than my parents did in years. Real family doesn't exploit you. Real family doesn't sacrifice your future for their convenience. Real family doesn't treat you like free labor and then act shocked when you refuse to continue being taken advantage of. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. I'm done with the manipulation, the guilt trips, the expectation that I should set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I'm done being the solution to problems I didn't create. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, it's not normal. It's not your responsibility to raise your parents' children. It's not selfish to want your own life. And it's okay to walk away from family members who exploit you, even if everyone else thinks you should just deal with it. You deserve better. You deserve to have your own childhood, your own adolescence, your own future. You deserve to be treated like the child you are, not like an unpaid employee. And if your family can't see that, then maybe it's time to find people who can. Trust me, life is so much better on the other side of that decision.